Sorry, I'm a minute late there. I was just tidying up a few loose ends here. I'm back. Welcome and happy Friday, everybody. If you're watching live, I hope you guys had a great work week here. And I'm excited to end our first inaugural stream week here. We made it through our first three episodes. Um, so, for tonight's episode, we're going to kind of wrap up a little bit of the loose ends, put a nice, beautiful bow on all the details that we went over yesterday. I know we went over a lot of it. So I hope we kind of can stream that into six finited details here for you from last night, um, as well as some of the initiatives that we have taken here on this program. And this is the Question Everything podcast here, episode 3. So I don't know what you guys have planned for this weekend. One of my little guilty hobbies or habit or guilty pleasures, I should say, is football. I'm always been in football since the high school times. Old school athlete, not so athletic anymore in my old days, but I'm a Illinois boy, pretty much raised there my whole life until I moved up to the great state of Wisconsin. But I'm a Chicago's fan, Chicago Bears fan, and enemy territory here, obviously. Great Northern Green Bay Packer Chicago rivalry. But I have some family from out of town coming in here this weekend. Gonna have a lot of good little finger food. Enjoy some of that bread and circus. Like I said on my first episode, you gotta have some ways to unwind, unplug in the matrix. Just digging in the rabbit holes all the time, it will become exhausting. So find some fun times. I hope you guys are having some fun plans for this weekend. But go Bears. Let's start here before we get into the main numbers. One number I had a hard time finding in my huge stack of notes that I took, my very ambitious stack of notes that I took yesterday, thinking I could get it all into 1 hour long segment, and unfortunately didn't quite make it, but was the red bricks. And I got some hard numbers for you now, folks, so we can go over those red bricks and the impossibilities of them, because it really does, right off the bat, just in the brick numbers, show how impossible the mainstream narrative of our history of just America alone, because you know we were focusing after primarily the last reset last night, so we'll be focusing on just that area, the supply chain, and the numbers that we could pull together. Well, I pulled together over the years and kind of compiled into one little segment. So the red brick impossibility, and we'll kind of cover this over when we go through the overview, but the raw counts between 1860 and 1900. This is how many bricks was estimated to be used. 2.8 billion red bricks laid in public works. Now, here's where the impossibility is, because all those red bricks, if you remember what I said yesterday, they have to be pretty much, they couldn't all be locally sourced. It's that red clay, right? So, with what the kilns there were in the Americas for the local on hand, there was a maximum of 500 million bricks, and that's with the 10,000 kilns across America in the 1860s, 1900s, right? So we used 2.8 billion bricks to build all of the structures, roughly. That's going to be primarily just the courthouses, the depots, in the World's Fairs. And we'll talk about a couple of those World's Fairs, giving you some of those overviews on the numbers. Hey, people in chat here, can I heard the audio issue at the end of the show. I don't know why it just kind of dropped off midway in the program. We hope here in the technical department we got that all figured out. Are you guys hearing me okay? If you could give me something in chat just saying, yeah, it's good volume. Let me know if it drops. I'll try and monitor that throughout the show because I don't really know why that dropped, but hopefully we got it all figured out here. Anyways, so we are missing 2.3 billion bricks. That's the unaccounted official number. So that's not just a little discrepancy, right? That's a billion. That's a billion with 2.3 billion. That's why I apologize as I work on getting better organized. I think I got a good system here. Yesterday, I really wanted to try and find those numbers because they really do speak volumes. I appreciate the guys in chat. Thank you very much. And yeah, I'll kind of monitor that, make sure it doesn't drop this time so you can hear me the whole episode. So, where did those 2.3 billion bricks go? Where did they come from? Well, as we know, most of the buildings that they were built, they were already there, most likely in ruin, most likely half buried in a form of disarray. So they repurpose and reutilize what they can there, kind of slap a cheap facade, try and repair it. That's why I see a lot of, even an old original brick, like patches of discolorization in the bricks. I believe that's why, if you look at the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., you have that big segment on it that's half colored bricks, half different colored stone. Officially, they say it was from the period where they just decided they didn't have the money anymore. They stopped during the Civil War, and then they didn't have the same colored bricks, the same color stone on hand. Well, I believe that's just, because it was a different era that came there. They just kind of patched what stonework they had laying around. That's why, if you ever look at some of those construction pictures of them, they're always just a few men standing around in suits with a half built monument. And then the discolorization, but you'll see that with the bricks as well. So they repurpose the stone, like the stones in ruins. Um, that's why we'll cover a little bit about the child labor and what their titles were. Um, that kind of adds more oddity and more clarity to this whole picture, okay? Um, and probably where some of that 2.3 billion bricks were discovered. So they repurpose what they have laying around. That'll make up for some of that 2.3 billion brick discrepancy. Um, but some of the bricks to like the World's Fairs, I have some figures on like the Chicago World's Fair we'll go over when we do that breakdown. Um, they're supposed to be built with just stucco, putty, etc., and made temporary, made in 2 years' time, and then last 6 months. But when you see the brick number that was said to be used for the Chicago World's Fair that I have, it, it's really kind of shocking. But we'll get that later on in the show here. So, a little bit more onto the brick numbers, because I told you guys yesterday I will come back here to deliver that. If you do all the math, like I said with the kilns, that's how you can tell. So, with total national kiln capacity, only 500 million bricks tops could be made in that whole period of time. So it would have been impossible with the shipping to ship anywhere close to that 2.3 billion. So even if you say they exported some of it in, or sorry, imported some of it in from foreign nations, that would look at all the brick buildings that they were building at the same time. Um, that would maybe cut into 5, 10%, because all those nations still had to build all those bricks in 1920s time period. That's, around rebuilds of those supposed world wars, which we'll talk another episode of the series about my thoughts on what all of the wars were: World War I, World War II, Civil War, Revolutionary War. I know we talked about it before in the past, but kind of do a little deeper dive on there in a coming segment. But with all the kilns firing nonstop 24/7, 365, it wouldn't come close. All the imports of the red bricks. So when I said we're getting that book together here for kind of a reference point, and it's not, I don't even really know if I can just put it up in a PDF, something nice and handy for you guys. I don't even want any money from it or anything. Maybe if I put it in a paperback, just shipping cost. But if I can find a way to PDF it for you guys, so you have a copy with like these cold hard figures that we're going over, because they're important to wake up the people that are the fence sitters, that just need a little bit of strong pushing. And when they type in those facts and figures and try and do the math themselves, it's not the first time truth seekers and the awakening community have done large scale math projects involving ovens. Maybe we'll talk about that with some of our war topics here in the next coming episodes. But as for the bricks, I mean, it's indisputable. Like, if I'm wrong, check the numbers yourself, guys. And you'll see you'll have to do a lot of digging to kind of get around that figure that I got. But I'll be welcome to help, provide my sources the best I can to show you where you can get those figures from and try the math yourself. But we're going to put that's all in that book here, that's in that draft style, figuring out exactly the best way to get it out to you guys, the cheapest and easiest, as I'm learning on this channel. I'm happy for this Friday show, because it leaves me so many days now where I wasn't just like getting all this stuff set up for the first couple episodes, and getting all those show notes going, but trying to figure out how to do a whole different thing that I've, like I said, in a couple episodes that I've never done before, and it's been awesome. But being at the weekend, I get to take a couple extra days to kind of play around with some formats, listen to some other podcasters, because I've never been like a podcast listener. I've never, a parent of two little ones, always running around, kind of trying to always be in the moment with them and provide as much content as I can, as consistently as I can for you guys over the years. Like, we don't really have time to like sit and listen to podcasts like that. So when I first started the show, that was when I probably consumed the most podcasts the last couple weeks leading up to the show, a couple days after the show, but just random ones here and there, kind of clips of that Candace Owens girl. That's a wonderful that's a wonderful deep rabbit hole. I don't know what you guys all think about that. The Candace Owens, Charlie Kirk world soap opera, As the World Turns, as I don't know if you remember those soap operas when we were kids growing up. But I'd love to hear your comments on what you think about that. Well, is it just a distraction from the list, or is there something there? But I think it's always a distraction. Most of the things you see in the mainstream is in some way, shape, or form a distraction, misdirection, confuse you and keep you busy from one thing, or keep you fighting one group while another group's secretly doing all the other stuff behind the scenes. But it's still fun to indulge. Like I said, same with me being a Chicago Bears fan. Um, we got to have some kind of fun, some kind of hobbies outside of work. And this has really became my work, my passion, that I'm able to do mostly full time now because of all you awesome folks, all the awesome suggestions, all the support of all my channels over the years. So I do appreciate that as well. But it's kind of fun to people watch those things too, like the people that take sports way too seriously, that make it like their whole entire life. Like they got 18 fantasy football leagues, they got two fantasy baseball leagues, and maybe don't indulge too much in the bread and circus like that, but you got to have some hobbies and fun. And if you guys are Packers fans, well, we can still be friends, but maybe not this weekend, not till after the game. So let's jump in now to the main portion here. Let's put a nice button bow on the whole reset. I showed you guys a full picture, how many resets, how many floods that I thought occurred. And then we kind of started going into the last reset in the Americas. You can talk about it, there's because the mud flood was, as we said, worldwide, right? So every single continent, we can probably spend many episodes digging into all the particulars there. Next week's show, too, we're going to have some visual objects as well here. I don't know if we'll have a webcam quite yet. Let me know what you guys think about that. If you want to look at my ugly mug for an hour and a half, 2 hours, that's perfectly all right. Then we'll give them what they want, but we will have some visuals, some pictures related to the topics at hand, etc. Um, but keep the feedback coming. Um, I do read them all. I do read all the old chats, comments, and stuff, and might not get a chance to respond to all of them individually. That so many different social medias to keep track of, but I do appreciate all the great feedback. With that, like I said, this show is your show just as much as mine. Um, a slideshow, yeah, well, definitely that's kind of what I was thinking too, like a slideshow. Maybe watch some videos that I put together over the week and stuff, because my other content's still going to be just as active and persistent as always. But I am investing a heck of a lot of time, and I'm so excited for some of the ideas and segments that I have in future weeks and the months ahead, because we do have a lot of stuff to go through, and it'll be fun. We'll grow and build this show together. But with that too, I kind of wanted to touch and ask your guys' opinion, and I'll read through all the chats and stuff at the end of the week. We'll have kind of some of the questions you guys asked in the last episode. I'll uh I'll read those out probably after we go over the 6, 7 bullet points here and what's coming forward for next week's episode, which is on the 13th. So Tuesday the 13th, if you're listening live. But either, yeah, probably afterwards, after we kind of touch on next week's episodes. Um, but looking at other podcasts, kind of talking to other people, getting advice. As I told you guys, I will never promote a product here or anything like that I don't believe in or don't agree with. But there are like segment breaks and like sponsor breaks and stuff, and I've gotten a lot of like emails that I'm inundated with. Um, this show, and thanks to your guys' shares and watching and stuff, has taken off in numbers the likes of which I didn't expect for the first few episodes of this. Just throwing it together the best I could by myself. You guys kept tuning in for every episode, kept growing and growing exponentially. I don't have the exact totals, or I'd give them to you, but they definitely doubled and tripled my expectations. I will say that, but they're just on so many different platforms, and I don't know how to kind of look at it all at once. I've been a social media guy for years now, and even then, I didn't know what I was doing when I first started, and I still don't really. But Those I can give you those numbers, but with like the podcast listeners and listening lives and whatnot, but we'll try and get those numbers together and let you guys know how just awesome we did on this show this week. Because I say we because it, like I said, it's our show, and I want to get your feedback on how we do going forward with this. I'd like to, continue to invest more and more time, give you guys more and more of my commitment to this. Um, so, like I said, these sponsor breaks, if I put like one or two in, it'd be a great time for me to, get up, stretch my legs, clear my throat, get a drink. Um, those I don't really know like particularly how they go or what they do, but I will never like voice a product personally that I haven't tried or tested myself. And if any of those ads or anything are too much of an issue for you guys, then we can look at alternatives as well. But, like I said, just enough that I can keep coming back to this more and more 3 days a week, 4 days a week. But if it's a vocal ad that I say, it's a product I like, I endorse, and I believe in. I don't have any of those now, but I'm just kind of spitballing kind of a show structure here. Um, and then the other ads, like the already pre recorded ones or whatever, those I was thinking, one or two times an episode, depending on if it's an hour and a half episode. That way, a minute or two break to clear your throat, get a drink or whatever, and come back to it, pay the light bills as it was. But let me know what you guys think about that, and we'll discuss that in next week's episode here. But let's get into the main portion here. Just wrapping up last week's or yesterday's episode and getting you guys 7 bullet points here. So we kind of already went over one with giving you guys those red brick numbers, but that's okay because I can definitely go over them again. I love pointing them out. So we got the red brick numbers. We got the orphan trains. We got the insane asylums. We got child labor. We got the World's Fair. We got the Document Bureau. Those are going to be the documents that we I talked about, the FOIAs, the Freedom of Information Acts, right? That I told you I had them all printed out and written out last night. Those are the those are the two completed and the details for each of those. My endeavor I want to talk to you guys about that we're going to be exploring together what I find. Look, I'm going to be getting access to some local vaults of like ground floor level original supposed blueprints, building filing permits. So that's what I said like yesterday. One of the smoking guns is you can't find that stuff. And I've made quite a few calls this morning, and I'll have some audio of those calls maybe for you guys next episode as well. But just of trying to like figure out where I can get these original building permits, the original blueprints, not a recreated blueprint, right? But like an actual hard copy blueprint, signed architecture, etc. Um, then I was just getting so much runarounds, etc. But I got one person um, locally here that's going to allow me access to some exclusive documents that I can't wait to share with you guys here next week. But with that, point number one here, the reset 1800 to today, got a liquefaction layer that's worldwide, primarily though focusing on America, between 15 to 40 feet uniformly. So that's not cultural layers, that's not gradual sediment buildup, because that's not constant across the world, right? There's some areas in the world where these topsoil levels actually recede every year, as I said. Um, so that doesn't explain the uniform 15 to 40 feet of soil that goes over any of the older buildings that like predates even the mud flood, the plasma stage resets, that goes over those. that goes over the architecture that should have been built after that period, but they have buried ground floors that were lost to all history books, all of those. So Chicago street raised in one of those instances to between 10 to 12 feet overnight in the late 1800s or mid 1800s, after shortly after the fires, and there's no reference of it, no ash layer, no anything like that. They just, uniformly all raise them. And there's no records of that. New Orleans has brick houses that are tilt 30 degrees and that were never re-leveled, even before Hurricane Katrina. San Francisco has 25 feet of mud at least. 1851, there's buried windows still visible. Great fires plus cholera was the excuses. However, our catacombs, all of our undergrounds underneath our cities, because we all have undergrounds too, they catacombs, but they're not filled with bones like the thousand other catacombs all across the world. You remember that thousand known documented catacombs worldwide that have found some form or another of human remains in large quantities. Not maybe as extravagantly done as the Paris catacombs, of course, but none so that I know of, at least that mainstream knows of, that has had human remains can be found in America. So nobody can explain any of these buried undergrounds that they keep finding. They're not catacombs for fillovers from cholera or from any other like Spanish flu or anything like that. They are buried levels, and they're not just tunnels or anything like that. Though some of them look like they're repurposed between the lower levels that were buried into tunnels with, again, all that red brick. No blueprints of those tunnels anywhere. Exactly right, New World Order. And that's what I was trying to make those calls earlier for, to try and find original blueprints that would explain those tunnels. I did, however, have documents over the years, foundations that when they were building a new building, they said original foundation, do not remove, do not alter. We'll talk about that here later. And that's part of my document burial and retrieval step that we're going to be doing and working forward on, and our goals and our minds for kind of making a difference in what we can do with this moving forward, that we'll talk about towards the end. So, again, the next point here, after that uniform layer between 15 40 feet of mud, unexplained ground levels all across America, um, the red bricks. Like I said, for those just tuning in, between 1860 and 1900, 2.8 billion bricks approximately in all public works records, courthouses, depots, world's fairs, train stations, etc., totaled about 2.8 billion estimated bricks. The max kiln capacities, that's the, brick factories, etc., would have been approximately 500 million bricks. That's 10,000 kilns that we had in the brick factories in this country at the time, between 1860 and 1900, firing 5,000 a week for 50 years. That will still leave, for those following along with the numbers, 2.3 billion bricks unaccounted for. That's one of my biggest smoking guns when it comes to America, is the amount of bricks, and not even just bricks, but as I mentioned last episode, the master builders, that, because those aren't just like the brick structures that we have now, right? They're just four walls and a ceiling and a roof, basically. Like, no, they have like the most ornate and beautiful details and spires that you ever see. And of course, most of them were torn down already, but nothing like the buildings we build now. So, who built all those beautiful structures as well? Perhaps that'll be a topic in itself for another video. The signature oddities: the mortar that's older than the topsoil, the reuse clause of permits. I'm just going through some of my additional details with the bricks. See if there's anything else I want to kind of spit out before we move on to the next one, the orphan trains. Oh, yeah, that was a good one. St. Louis Courthouse, bricks stamped 1870, yet supposedly constructed in 1887. Denver Capitol, same kiln mark as old courthouse, 1,200 miles away. So the red bricks shortage, the dates on some of these red bricks. I have some pictures on that too. I think I'll kind of show that to you guys next week too when I put those photo slides together for our next episodes. Just kind of show you what I meant, and like the stamps on kilns that are 1,200 miles away, which would be impossible for the time frame. Were bricks paid for or bartered? There's quite a lot you can go into red bricks. We should almost devote a whole episode to red bricks. I've done a few videos on them in the past. I don't know if you guys know this. That was a question from Call 40, if you guys are wondering there, listening in. Um, the red bricks can actually hold energy. The red pigmentation, the iron in the dye, and the clay, um, they can transmit, they can store energy. Um, they're using that type of technology nowadays, but there's signs in the past that they used red brick as like energy transmitters and energy stores for devices like, harnessing from those ether antennas, right? They would store, like in households, they would perhaps store the energy in these red bricks. I don't know if you guys seen those videos that I did or not on that, but perhaps we'll go further into that. But the red iron oxide in bricks, they say, I've seen a lot of people theorize that that could come from like blood and from remains, and some of the remains from all these catacombs. I wonder, like, perhaps they used them to build some of the shortfall in the bricks and utilizing some of the remains from the last resets victims, and then carefully arranged those remains after they were stripped clean in those very kind of demonic fashions. If you've ever looked at the catacombs in Paris, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But that's just kind of a theory of mine there with the red bricks. Like perhaps they were partially made up the difference with the ones that didn't survive the last reset. And for those who did survive the last reset, as we move on to the third topic here for the bullets, the orphan train exodus between 1854 and 1929, a total mainstream headcount of 250,000 kids shipped east to west, and that's just in America alone, okay? Nothing like that's really been done in this country before or since. And it wasn't just America that this was done, these kids were shipped everywhere. They were shipped in Europe, shipped in the UK, all kind of similar fashion. We can go into some of the other continents in the world in future videos. Like I know in the UK they had like if you were a single mother or something, they would just take your kid, even if you were not struggling or poor or like homeless, or they would just kind of pretty much take your kid as like a morality cause. And that's at least the official record where they explain all these kids, at least partially, some of the intakes. And it seems like it's a lot more than just 250,000 in America alone. And We'll kind of go over that when we go over the child labor evidence. So, 250,000 kids shipped east to west by the mainstream narrative. Zero parents listed, none. No birth certificates, no accompanying documents. So, hey, even if these kids wanted to reconnect with mom or dad, maybe after they get off the sauce or whatever, surviving relatives, nope, not none. No, zero parents listed. 99% of all orphan trained kids or unknown origins. 300 orphan asylums at that same time, eight period, 1850 to 1875. That was the maximum time in America, the maximum number of orphan asylums there were. And like I said yesterday, all connecting at the same time. That's a massive anomaly. Anomaly that never occurred in any, you know, recent history times before or after. And it's, not World War II, not World War One, not Civil War, none of that. These kids just had no origin. And with that, that's how you get away with those lies and those narratives. The few peoples and families that do hold out history, they'll eventually fade away. They try their best to pass on the lineages and their knowledge and what hasn't gotten corrupted or risked getting corrupted with the government funded education systems that we're in, right? That hopefully they held on to the true history knowledge if they didn't get into these insane asylums. Because this is the number I wanted to go over and highlight yesterday, too, particularly the insane asylums. Um, but back to the orphans and the orphan trains, geographically, like um, they were shipped by the ledger from one end of the country to the other. No rhyme or reason. Just it was like they wanted to break up these families and these like lineages and spread them out, not just to like the newly supposed new cities and like the American Southwest, but they just wanted them as far away from their origin as possible and not letting kids know where they came from or who their relatives were. So you could tell them whatever you wanted to. Kids are impressionable, especially to the adults that they trust. And these adults that were in care of them in these massive orphan asylums that were built and funded by in large part, secret society money, government. We'll talk maybe a little bit more details about that. The Fellowship of oh, I can't remember the name. Yeah, it's well, but yeah, a lot of secret society fundings. Not necessarily the ones that you guys are thinking. Not like the Illuminati or the Masons. It was like an offset of the Masons. The Fellowship of oh gosh, should have wrote that down. But yeah, we'll go over that funding of all these orphan asylums because you look at the buildings. Supposedly, they said all built within a year or two time frame with bricks that were possibly not available on hand, but the fundings are all these secret society groups that have had their hands in all of our countries for many, many generations and centuries. So these kids would just go to these like stations and just either get filled into these orphan asylums or they would be auctioned off. There would be like baby raffles and giveaways at world fairs and at prizes at state fairs and stuff. Like unvetted, unlike filtered people that just would basically put in a submission for a chance to win a baby. Hey, who doesn't want to take home a baby from a fair? I mean, I know goldfish and everything and hamsters were great pets at my state fair, but I never seen any babies. And then also in America at the same time period, maybe a little bit afterwards, where we have the baby incubator exhibits. It's almost like they're trying to build out the population for all these big cities and empty ruins that they're trying to fill up with people to run them. And if you look at older pictures of like some of our major cities like New York, Chicago, not just the beautiful architecture, But watch videos and pictures and stuff from those cities, and you'll see how big and massive it is. And I've highlighted this in some of my videos before, but big and massive, but completely empty. There's like handfuls of people. But for cities that look like they could support millions and millions and millions, and you look at the population numbers at the time, and it's justifiably empty because there's barely any people living in those big, massive urban sprawls. Not until recent times where we're just now seeming to fill into all the britches of these old, like big cities of America. But before then, before a lot of the old architecture was torn down or like reshaped, you look at these old pictures in like New York, and it was like cities that were built for giants or cities that were built for people way, way bigger than the people, the little tiny like groups of people that were running in packs in those big cities. So, with that, also, all these kids from these orphan trains, there's a large document gap. There's no death certificates, no hospital logs, just ledgers of wards of state. Cross referenced asylum spikes the same year between 1854 and 1863. 1877, three waves, and that was the final wave in or there was three waves, sorry. 1854, 1863, and 1877 were the three waves of these orphan trains, all with no paperwork, and all the ones that died away, the orphanages, or the ones that got adopted off, there's no paperwork really for them at all either. So who were these kids? Where'd they come from? Were they the first generation of NPCs? Were they just kind of said to be trained in from, delinquent families or whatever, but to be sent off to the middle of nowhere with no lineage, no family, and just shoved in orphanages that could house up to 1,000 plus kids, that seems like you might as well keep them with some family in the area the best you could. And why not just house them in the orphan asylums in those areas? Because those orphan asylums, those 300 orphan asylums, were built in every state pretty much. And like now we have like maybe a couple dozen orphanages in the whole entire country. Make it make sense. We're supposed to have 8 billion people now, or whatever they say we have. I think it's a lot less. Um, but you got to fudge the number somewhere to make all this giant architecture and all these sprawls like make sense. It's like I was thinking of that the other day. We're supposed to have like such a boom of population last like century or so, like several billion added to the population exponentially. But how many new cities have you guys seen? Well, let me know in the comments and stuff. See if you guys have noticed this anomaly. I was kind of thinking of that the other day, like one of those, oh, you never see your neighbors bringing in the groceries or anything. But I never see new cities. I never see new cemeteries. There's a lot of conspiracies about that too. We'll talk about, but I never see any new cities being popped up. And if we're just having like big giant spikes, you would think there'd be cities popping all over the place. There's plenty of land, especially in just America alone. Maybe not so much in like Europe or like the UK or anything, but places in the Southwest and stuff, there's hundreds of miles in between any type of town or settlement. And no cities or anything really seem to be growing exponentially in this population. So where in all the Western cities are supposedly dying. So if their pop or our fertility rates are supposedly all plummeting, but I've never seen any new cities. Let me know if you guys have though. I'd be interested to know that. So with that though, let's go into another set of asylums built at the same period. Insane asylum. The peak number, like I talked a little about yesterday, 250 state asylums added total beds of 300,000. Peak occupancy at 1905 was 290,000 patients. So that is, wow, that is a lot of people. That is a lot of asylums that were built up. And again, that definitely explains why we have 2 point, what is 2.3 billion shortfall of brick, because you look at these buildings, and that's why they were burned down by fire, because I'm sure if you look at more than just the brick details that were used, they would make no sense if we seen them now. Like structures built in a whole year that could house 1,000 patients plus. And you ever been into old asylums or anything like that? Most of them all get torn down now, but there's one in my city, or in a city next to me, big giant one, and it was torn down like 20 years ago, but that was like a 500 room asylum for the area I am in, Wisconsin. Really small population even now, and for an asylum that massive in this area made no sense. I mean, it was in ruin for darn near half a century, but that's the case with a lot of these. But in the peak, they just decided everybody was crazy and they needed to build 250 state asylums. So, and those 290,000 people, let's look at some of these diagnoses, because this is how, again, the two layers of separating the surviving kids away from their families, their mothers and fathers, putting them into a whole new different area of the country, the world, no sporting documents, no way to find their birth family or anything. Some as young as infants. And also in the same time period, you can mail kids. So just no lineage or anything like that. And these insane asylums, you can get diagnosed for post trauma. Post trauma, they didn't say what post trauma, cataleptic stupor, and melancholy was 60% of the diagnoses in all these insane asylums. So out of the 290,000 patients, let's just go over that one more time just so you guys can realize how easily they were able to commit anyone and their mom at that time. So that's where no record, no memories of Tartaria come from, because if you refuse to comply with the narrative, if you were a family that survived and knew of the past and the resets, like dare not speak out, you would be one of those ones that would be thrown into those asylums. M- Melancholy, cataleptic stupor, which what is that? And post trauma. So when there's no EEGs yet available, there's no way to check for any anomalous brain waves, because EEGs, those are like those old schools, like wires. And I don't know exactly if you guys ever seen one. They're kind of the predates of like the brain scans and stuff they have now, but they're like these big wires and no like shower cap that they would stick on your head, and they would crudely be able to, read your brain wave levels. And but that was pre then, like that's the way they like would diagnose if you had like some kind of brain anomalies, and then they could legit find a way to commit you. But those 60% of that 290,000 people, like you could just have melancholy or post trauma. And then doctors, then, like what their words said was bond, mostly because at that time, that's when all the medical systems, all the schools were all bought up, all uniformed teaching methods, all uniform textbooks and curriculums, including all the hospitals around the country, instill a certain narrative, a certain rules. And the people that founded that, a lot of big oil and some other of the big name powerful people that will probably should go over in a separate episode, because that's a whole can of worms in itself. But the richest people controlled all the universal, and it's the same format of schooling that we're on now, but they standardized it across the country, making sure that only one set of information, one set of knowledge gets heard, and anything else gets silenced. All these private schools, all these private universities, all that stuff, all these private medical colleges and stuff, they were all basically shut out unless they took the money from these people and installed their curriculum. Nowadays, our textbook curriculums, at least the ones we grew up with primarily, were all published and sold and kept in our schools by a certain Miss Maxwell who trafficked a certain you know what who magically nobody else have gotten convicted, but her trafficking of zero you know what's, well, her father and her whole family had the giant publishing house that published and edited and created and categorized all of our textbooks from science, history, social science, geography textbooks. Gee. So, yeah, I would really trust anything that they teach us in school. I wonder why they would lie to us because those type of people that always get busted in those type of situations and the evil deeds that they do, they always seem to be running like all of our information as well. But again, that's a whole can of worms for another episode. So 60% of the people that get in asylums can just get in for just being perceived as, post trauma, whatever, stupor, or melancholy. And the layouts of these asylums, the 250 asylums, they all had tunnels underneath every wing, kid sized tunnels, and doorways about 8 feet tall, below current grade levels, or mud flooded, repurposed buildings. That's what they were, right? They're not building 250 asylums in that period, 300 orphan asylums, and God knows how many courthouses. I wish I could have gotten that solid of a number for you guys, but that's why there's little tunnels in all of these. They're unburied or undiscovered levels, sunken or hidden levels intentionally. But all of these asylums had those. All of these schools, these old schools, have these tunnel systems. In my local area, all the schools, that's so weird. I don't know why it would be that. Maybe you guys can explain it to me and leave me a comment, and I would just love to hear an explanation for it because nobody's ever been able to give me an explanation, not a historical society, nothing around here. But at least at one time in my city, every one of our, I think it was 8 or 9 schools, had a tunnel connecting to one another. So all 9 schools from elementary, middle school, high school, the old world schools, all connected to each other. That was weird. And as you know, there's buried tunnels being found all in these cities, red brick tunnels. Probably definitely even add more to that 2.8 billion deficit. So, and at that same period, apparently all these adults died and parents died to a point where, well, I mean, they were in insane asylums, I guess, but the reason, again, they warranted shuffling hundreds of thousands of unaccompanied minors in trains across the country at that time, there was such a labor shortage at that period, the child labor, no other period in the human recorded history. I mean, there's always kids working with their parents, working with their families, etc. Um, some children in the world, are forced into labor at a very early age, yeah, but for the most part, a large population of a civilization's workforce was never children and never would have been. But again, this time was a time of first and a time of onlys. Um, I'm saying Australia and America worked for, yes. I'm careful to not read out so many. I try and so as I get new to this, but it's not my first time in the rodeo, guys. Right? Been running all these channels over many years, and we all know as truth seekers, our various stages of waking up. There's some things you can and can't say. Now, I tell you guys, like I will always try and give you everything, all the information, all the facts as bluntly and as unfiltered as I can. But I also want to stay around for you guys. I've grown and learned so much from you guys and have had so much fun building my audiences and platforms over the years where I don't want to just go away by just being so brazen with what I say. So if you ever hear me kind of hold back on saying certain particulars or certain names there's usually a reason for it. And we can go into maybe private conversations or messages, which is another thing I'm going to talk about at the end of the show. But yeah, I try not to say anything live or over the air because it's always a struggle with censorship. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, everybody, and you want to get your voice out there, especially if you have a plan to do something about it. And I do think we here have a good plan to do something about this deception and, like finding some hard data about it and what we can do, but by just knowing it's a lie, but what we can do now that we know. And that's why I feel it's important to bite my tongue sometimes and not say what I want to say. But with that, back to the child labor. 1.75 million kids. I don't know if you guys remember that number from yesterday, but 1.75 million kids in the peak periods up to 1910 were working between one child. So for every four adults, there was one child. That is crazy. And it's not like to supplement the apparent shortage of adults. We'll figure out where these adults went, maybe. Um, but they were put in the most dangerous and harsh conditions. That's why I told you guys earlier at the beginning of the show some of the titles I wanted to share with you of these child laborers. So they weren't just, watching younger ones, like maybe I could see my 7-year-old watching my 1.5-year-old if like drafting to war type situations were to occur, like in a pinch he could while mom was at the factory producing bombers and stuff. But no, they weren't watching kids at nurseries or whatever. They were put into textile mills. And I don't know if you've seen textile mills and paper mills and stuff back then, but they're dangerous places to work now. And even more so back then. I mean, there was just these giant machines that, could just suck you up in them in an instant. And at best, for supervision at those big mines and those text mills and those paper mills and stuff, it would be one child for every four adults. That is not enough and that's talking about kids like 7, 4, 5 years old. And in these mines, what would they get? Their titles at these places, they were tunnel bracers. That's a weird name. That was one of the top names census wise. You can look it up. Job titles for these little kids, 5 to 15. Tunnel bracers, sewer scrubs. That's also a very weird name. I and again, not much specifics. We don't have sewer scrubs. I mean, we have public works workers, tunnel bracers. I mean, we have miners, we have construction workers, but not tunnel bracers necessarily, or sewer scrubbers, or sewer scrubs. Sorry, not sewer scrubbers, sewer scrubs, and foundation graders. That's another weird one. So I told you with these mines, what they were actually doing, at least my thought was those little tiny hands were perfect for mines, which I think are just, you know, almost excavation areas of the old world buildings that, haven't quite been unearthed, just beneath the surface. The powers that be are still looking for treasures and any types of technology or information that could be, gathered up by the peons and, the Joe Q publics, the little kids that are working in these mines. So they would, have all these people digging out these mines and any resources and stuff. A lot of these mines would be still buried buildings. And those little hands are perfect for going through all the broken debris and the structural debris, the little broken bricks, and of course the bones. And yeah, that's why they had so many kid miners. Like you would think a miner would you would want the strongest person possible, the most resilient person possible. So you would like ration these kids, but no, they wanted them because that's where they could get all in those tiny cracks and crevices. Very, very weird. The World's Fairs. That's another marker here. One of my big ones I want to touch about because of that brick I mentioned for one of the World Fairs. But at that same time period of these orphan asylums, these orphan trains, these insane asylums, they had the bricks left over, apparently, though they didn't, as you can tell by the numbers that I'm giving you. But they had the brick, the material, the time, the money, I guess, just casually bored. And decided every year they're going to build these world fairs. Sometimes they even had two or three world fairs going on at the same time across the world. But the ones in America in particularly are some of the most beautiful and fascinating ones. Like most exquisite, like world fairs. I think personally, maybe I'm a little biased, American myself, but out of all the other ones. And the official narrative is and this is uniform from all of them, in the most isolated cities. They weren't just built in places like Chicago or New York, which you can say, well, maybe they can get the materials and the infrastructure in place to build something like that. And that many time, like lots of people needed jobs, lots of little children, I guess, running around for jobs. But maybe somewhere like there. But no, they were being built in places like Omaha, Nebraska, which is even to this day one of the most isolated, like somewhat bigger cities in the country. I've driven there a couple times um, going through like to Colorado, but there's really nothing there too exciting, and there's nothing around it for pretty much 100 miles in any different direction. But apparently, in the early 1900s, they had a big, giant World's Fair, just like as big and intricate as the Chicago one, or the one in Philadelphia, or the one in St. Louis. And then then they just tore it down in 6 months and left it at that. But in that period, 6 million people were said to have visited in a 6 month time frame. For one, Omaha's current population could not hold that big of an influx of people in a 6 month time frame, I would think. Let alone like the hotels or whatever. I mean, sure, they could just be camping out in tents or ox carts, as they probably say, but there was not enough infrastructure, food in that area to support that large of an influx for a 6 month exposition, let alone manpower, materials, or resources. One of the things I did, I was a freight auditor for many, many years. That's a lot of like the transportation industry, the shipping industry, um, working with supply chains, their logistical support. And you have to have a well oiled machined logistical system to just run your day to day operations. Even today, with the click of the internet and everything, like to set up a good, well ran supply chain, you have to always be on top of it, and you have to have a lot of work to get shipped across the country day in and day out. Omaha, Nebraska, in the middle of nowhere at that time, no airplanes, airships maybe, but no airplanes, barely any type of train system or anything like that to get there, let alone to get 6 million people. They're not coming in horse and buggy. And again, how are they getting the material for that 6 million people attended World Fair? That was the one in 1898 in Omaha, Nebraska, by the way. And that's just one of them. But this is the number I wanted to talk about with World's Fairs in America. The Chicago World's Fair. So 1,200 structures were built in an 18-month time period. And they say it's always temporary materials, right? Like paper mache or stucco or whatever. But they say, it's just temporary materials made to only last 6 months. Well, I don't know how they would be able to build that in a 2 year period in some harsh Chicago winters off the lakefront, right? Because I don't know if you've ever been to Chicago. I grew up in the area, but it gets pretty cold. It gets pretty windy. It gets pretty snowy. It gets pretty rainy. And that does not bode well for temporary materials. Well, it turns out that was a lie when they say that it's all temporary. You know how many bricks they use in just the Chicago World's Fair alone? And you can find this in public record 500 million bricks, mostly red brick, used. That exceeded the national output alone for just that World's Fair. For that time period that it was built, manufactured, it far exceeded the 500 million. Because, right, remember the 500 million was a number, if you remember from the red brick deficits, we could only fire in between 1860 and 1900 a maximum of 500 million bricks, running at our 10,000 max produced kilns and brick factories, 5,000 bricks a week at 50 years. And even with just those are $2.3 billion brick, or sorry, 2.3 billion bricks unaccounted. Part of that 2.3 billion is the 500 million bricks used in the supposed temporary fair of Chicago. And I mean, if you're in such a national brick shortage, obviously in that time period, how are you going to have 500 million bricks just laying around for just one World's Fair? St. Louis, they had the one of again another massive World's Fair in St. Louis. They also had 1893. They had the world's largest Ferris wheel that to this day we just barely got a bigger Ferris wheel, but it still didn't come close to the first ever Ferris wheel. I don't know if you guys heard this real quick. Let me give you this number for the Ferris wheel. Okay, so the Chicago World's Fair Ferris wheel in 1893 was not only the largest up until recent times, standing at 264 feet tall. It could house a total occupancy of 2,000 people. So 2,000 people for one Ferris wheel in 1893. That is wild. And then that same World's Fair Ferris wheel, that's also the first Ferris wheel ever, supposedly. I'm not even joking. The first Ferris wheel ever invented or constructed successfully was the biggest Ferris wheel that we've ever built in all of human history up until now. I think. Let me check. I'll do a quick Google search for you here. Biggest Ferris wheel. So the biggest Ferris wheel today is the Abu Dhabi and United Arab Emirates. 250 meters, about 820 feet tall. So that's, quite a big one. And makes the tallest observation wheel located at Blue Water Island. I want to see how many people. That's what I wanted to look for. Biggest Ferris wheel capacity, UAE. They still don't even have the same amount. Close, actually, not too shabby. So the biggest Ferris wheel today, 820 feet tall, has 1,750 passengers. I mean, that's a pretty close run at the first ever Ferris wheel ever, but we'll eventually get better than we were almost 100 and some years ago, where we could build far smaller here and 264 feet here and 2,000 people we're able to hold in that time frame. But that's just crazy. Some of the buildings, some of the first, they took that Ferris wheel and they supposedly made it so it could be like able to be taken back down and assembled at other World's Fairs because it bounced around a couple World's Fairs after Chicago because they built this and again the World's Fair's Ferris wheel was built in 2 years as well. So they took that apart and then they sent it off to St. Louis. And I think it was at like one or two other World's Fairs and maybe even a stop along the way, but it ended its life in the World's Fair in St. Louis. They apparently welded all the connections together and they couldn't disassemble it anymore. But that's just crazy. They were able to build portable Ferris wheels in 1893 that could house 2,000 people in them. They I apparently recently unearthed part of the Chicago World's Fair Ferris wheel in St. Louis recently. It was just buried a couple meters underground. If you look that up, that's pretty cool. See if I can find the news article here in my stack of stuff. So I want to see how deep they said the part of the Ferris wheel was and how big it was. Here it is. So yeah, it was found in was buried in St. Louis's World's Park with some modern surveys suggesting its presence, but it's largely a legend. And then they recently unearthed part of that in there to make it not a legend. So in the park that the St. Louis World's Fair allegedly was in, they found several meters beneath the surface part of this giant Ferris wheel that they had to destroy, but apparently build or they wanted to bury some of it down there. They say it was as a memento, but again, no records of any of this stuff either. But that's kind of getting side notes on that Ferris wheel, though. So you have all these World's Fairs, and some of those World's Fairs, like the Tennessee World's Fair, with that big giant pyramid that they say was just a temporary pyramid. All of those running up the brick deficit. Crazy. And then they burned the St. Louis Fair down for insurance. But here's the thing about that with that buried part of the World's the Fair's Ferris wheel that I told you about, there's no ash layer in any of that, any of those several meters of soil or anything like that. There's no proof that those World Fairs buildings were burned down in the St. Louis Fair. However, that's what the official story said, that it was all burned down and demolished on site for insurance, basically. Though there's no ash found in any of the loyal, no ash found in any of the layers of soil, only sand. Perhaps they had a directed energy weapon type of fire, as we can see what those do in some modern scenarios, but no ash to be found at the World's Fair that burned down for the insurance money. And with that, that's kind of the main summary here and some of the irregularities that I've found over the years. Kind of wanted to throw in there. I didn't know exactly what portion, but the Louisiana Purchase map shows, for example, brick roads pre settlements. There's no settlements or anything, but there's roads that are shown made of brick, and that can be found in the Louisiana Purchase map. Something for you guys to look. But yeah, that kind of goes over the 6, 7 bullet points here that I wanted to cover for the mud flood in America. And you guys have any questions or anything about the subject matter I went over the last couple days, by all means, throw them in here to this chat. I don't know if I can see all the chats that I have connected with my different platforms, but if I can try and get to them, I'll try and get to them here, get some audience participation, because I wanted to kind of go to the last part of the evening here, last segments of the show, the back to the present here. So that's all in the past. That's, we know the mud flood happened at this point, laying out my 6 points. And I'll find a way to maybe share them all with you, not just in that book, but like kind of a bullet point here for you guys have in the next coming days. Just see them all. If you have any more questions, leave them in the comments. I always read them and, we can discuss them together and chat in the comments afterwards in the next coming days on the show's break. But I think those 6 points are irrefutable, even to the most like closed minded person. I mean, there's always going to be the NPCs that'll always follow blindly, but if you can show those 6 points to people in that reference guide that I'll have for you here in like PDF form, in this presentation, I'll post in the next couple of days too. But I think if you show even a couple of those, but in particularly, and why I was so focused on coming back to this today, that red brick number. It's verifiable. It's kind of like some other furnaces there in Europe that also with verified math that it just cannot be explained. Like the shortage, and again, like I said, 2 billion is not a small discrepancy. That right there should get people to start. Well, maybe the narrative isn't exactly what they said. Maybe all these buildings, maybe there's something more to them. That's why 1776, the founding of this country, this great nation, the U.S. of A. Like, was the founding, the founded cities? What does founding mean? It means somebody founded. That's kind of why they use that code. They don't say it's established or started in 1776. They use words like founded. Same with these children, these unaccompanied children in these orphan asylums. Their names, they were called not orphans but foundlings. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. That's a weird name, like foundlings, most because they didn't have any parents, any trace of lineage with them at all. So that was just kind of the nickname they went with. Foundling, founded, founded cities, foundation. You know, our language is coded. There's hidden meaning behind everything. Words have hidden meaning. So the founding of America, 1776, last reset period. That's when I think the last mud flood was. I've seen various different people tell me over the years, different level, different time frames. I think this one, like I don't know, like Phoenix or Archaic Sky, that people always talk about to me in my comments. I think they said like every 130 years or something. I don't know the exact number he has, but whatever that is, if that is the case, if that is our, the overlaying, overlaying, consistent or the overlaying consistency in the community, that it happens every 150, 200, 130 years, then all those metrics say that one perhaps is bound to come again. And that's another reason why I feel it's important what we're doing. Like, we need to, okay, and this is, the big focus that I want with us as a community, us growing as a community. I want us to find the fragments of history that are still out there. I want us to preserve it. I want us to secure it. I want us to spread the knowledge, spread it to our family, spread it to our kids, whoever will listen to us. Present it in as smart of a way as you can. Don't ever try and be too pushy on people. We all woke up at our own time frames. Some had to get, drug kicking and screaming. A lot of people have good friends to thank for that, I'm sure. But, we all woke up at our own pace. And I've always found it's best to be calm, be a little firm in your beliefs. Don't be afraid to, don't just roll over and, so your boomer parents or whatever get so hostile about the moon landing or about any chances of any alternate history. Like, I'm not saying like start screaming at them, but like don't be afraid to like stand firm on your values because that's how we preserve this history too. That's why it's important this channel and this, you know, time together we work on building and growing our knowledge and sharing it, but sharing it in a right way. That's, kind of a positive, thought I want to leave you guys with for the weekend and the break up until the next show on Tuesday. Like, be positive, enjoy this world. Yeah, we are lied to about everything, more so than we can probably even fathom, even in shows like this and all of our gathering as a community and all of our knowledge over the years. There's still so much hidden, so much literally buried that it'll be impossible to find it all in our lifetime, but we can make it maybe a little more accessible, a little more knowledged. It's a little more brought into the mainstream, right? Like I said yesterday, okay? Um, Legitimize the delegitimized. We've been lumped in with just every other conspiracy under the sun. And you know the whole thing about conspiracy is to just people use that as like a term to just dismiss anything that goes against the mainstream these days. But if you show them numbers like this, it's not just some crazy conspiracy. You can take off your tinfoil hat, be legitimized, have those numbers that even the smartest person and well versed person in history, and that was one of my subjects. That's why I'm so passionate about finding the truth and everything and questioning everything I thought I knew before. It's one of my biggest hobbies with my late father. Was history. I mean, we're big history buffs. World War II, World War I. I mean, they do such a great job. I'll give them credit. The parasites do. They do such a great job painting a picture for us, right? That we don't really need to ever dig so much. Like, we got great World War II movies. I mean, my father would always catch the latest and greatest World War II movies and chat about them and chat about Churchill and all this stuff. He was a big Patton fan, and but it was so like my dad I always thought was the smartest person I ever knew. So like to realize how the smartest person I ever knew was so deceived, and I wish I could talk to him today about all this stuff. I wish he was still around to see, and I feel like he would give me some pushback, like a lot of our boomer parents probably do when we bring up any of the subject matter or whatever to them. But he was, he's such an intelligent man. He was always listening to both sides. He was always willing to question his beliefs. Like I said, that's where I've gotten that mantra from. In part, was from my dad's teachings of always question everything, always question the narrative. That's why I can't believe we both missed this. I'm not dumb by any means, but I might be a little bit smarter than the average bear in some regards, and probably dumber in other regards. But boy, I felt so dumb and naive when I started learning the truth all those years ago. And I couldn't let it go. And that's, I'm the type of person that once I get I'm a dog with an itch. Once I get that little sniff, that little hair up my bum, I can't stop. And that's why maybe I'm so good at this. And I was so able to find all this information over the years for you guys, putting all these videos together, having such a consistent and ambitious drive for this. I mean, it was, a passion I was, I guess, maybe made for. But it's crazy how we were all duped so easily. And like, even if you were well studied and well versed in history, it was painted to us in such a intricate tapestry, such a different web. And, there's so many different degrees in this fake history that you can go out in universities and get, Greek history, Greek philosophy, ancient Egyptian studies, and so many different webs that it's impossible for people they thought anyways to ever dig just beneath that surface, because that's all it took. Once you found a couple lies, a couple blatant out lies that completely contradicted what they told us about history, and then you see how violently they'll try and dismiss us and delegitimize us. And despite the evidence and the visual facts that we can show them, but numbers and data and visuals is a complete picture. It's like a negotiation, right? It's like a debate. It's like I said, a court of law type of setup. I wanted to present this to you guys tonight. It's um it's a way they have no backing. They got, oh well, you just got to check the censuses and tell them we have. Call up your local, and that's where I'm gonna kind of my last part here, but call up your local historical society. Call up your local city building permit office. Do what I did. See if you can find out any more information than I have, because I couldn't. I have a meeting with a curator at one local museum, and that we'll talk about next week again. But one curator that has some fragments of some of the buildings just around this area, and there are so many red brick buildings that they destroyed so long ago. It's so sad seeing some of the old pictures, but can't find any of the original documentation, the original foundations, any of that. Do that same thing. Show them that, we checked our numbers, we checked our math. They're like, it backs up. Like, it is in the burden. the burden of proof lies with them at this point. And I believe if we were to take this into like a court of law scenario, we would absolutely, our case would absolutely win because the, the defense side, like they would have no way to be able to prove any of or disprove any of this. Like it's cold hard numbers. It's not just a one-off situation. It's not, oh well, yeah, that's a weird building, weird why buildings are like that, but maybe that's just all what it was at the time. Well, what about the orphans? What about the insane asylums? What about the red brick shortages? What about the child labor? What about the World's Fairs? Why don't we do World's Fairs like that today? We don't. We haven't. Not for a long, long time. Let them know all these things that, it's not just some crazy conspiracy. It's not just, huh, that's weird. Like one or two little quinky dinkies. No, it's a big picture that paints a worldwide web of lies for centuries. Everything we've taught, everything we know, all the things that we consume, it's all BS. And like, it's important. So, the last topic for the night, with that being said, my document retrieval process and my steps to, in the current times here, do something more than just being a talking head, more than just being a person that posts videos and stuff that catches your eyes, but we need to start submitting documentation requests. I mentioned a little bit about this yesterday. So the document is complete here for the Smithsonian. The reason why I want to have my Freedom of Information Act for them first, my number one, is because all those giants from those newspaper articles I told you guys about last night, right? I think it was like 2000. I don't have that number. I'm not going to dig it around. It's not that important, but 2000 separate newspaper stories in America from like mid 1800s to early 1900s, like 2000 stories of giant remains. And every one of those were sent to the Smithsonian, 1875 to 1917. So 3,000 giant skeletons shipped out. And all those records, there's no shipping records of all those giants arriving to the Smithsonian, where they were told we were told as a public back then that they were there. So at least publicly available in any of our known channels or sources, initially there is no documents on that. And if you guys find any or whatever, I've done everything under the sun, Chat GPT, Grok, calling places, doing, all my due diligence, looking all online and stuff, nothing. So this Freedom of Information Act will request any and all information requiring for shipping manifest between 1899 and 1916 from the Smithsonian. Um, and with that, we're going to be able to see where these remains were going to be classified, what ended up happening to them, because they had to go somewhere. They all went to the Smithsonian. Only very few of them, if ever, that were addressed again, were said to just be dismissed as fakes, which out of 3,000, I'd like to check their math on that. And that's what these documents, if I get nothing, well, then you see, obviously, they did something with those records in that time frame. And that definitely adds some more questions, right? If I get a big giant stack of papers to go through, well, maybe we find some information about them. Maybe they'll have some, just maybe they're all three. If all 3,000 were legitimately proven to be hoaxes and fakes, like that's fine. That's cool. I can live with that. But I want to see the documentation. I want to see where the remains ended up and where they went. I think that's only fair. We do pay for the Smithsonian. They were the ones that were the handlers of this period of our history. We entrusted all these residents of this country at the time, trusted the Smithsonian with all that information. So we should at least be able to see if it's right or where it ended up. But we'll possibly find some smoking guns in that too. Seeing not only where did these remains come from all over the country to the Smithsonian, but maybe in particularly, where did they go to? Maybe if they're not all at the Smithsonian, as they claim there isn't, there's, no traces, they've been destroyed or whatever. But maybe in those shipping manifests, we see some short ledger. And that's partially what I can't wait to get something back because, part of my background is freight auditing, shipping, manufacturing, logistics, reading basically piles of freight bills every day and bills of ladings and fun and boring stuff like that. But I could dig through that stuff. I could understand it from a historical standpoint, and I could maybe find something of description of maybe these were sent to some places for testing. We've seen like the government working with Nephilim in Afghanistan and finding giants in Afghanistan and capturing some. And maybe there's other sites other than the Smithsonian that these remains go to. Shipping manifests are a good start, a good foundation for us as a channel, us as a team, because we are a team to work on. Give me some more too in the comments and stuff in chat. Let me know and I'll look over them on the show break here. We're gonna wrap up in just a few minutes, by the way, folks. But I'm a like I said, I'm a bookworm. I'm a paper and notes type person, and I haven't had a real purpose until like this podcast came to fruition. Like this is where that outlet of the next step, all the years of research, all the videos, all the years of building an audience. I mean, I would think if people could prove or disprove my stuff so easily, then I think like I would have went away a long time ago. I'm not about it for clicks. I'm not about it for fame. Like I said, like I never intended to be a social, media like influencer or anything when I started these. Like what 2021 maybe I think was my first channel, but it was a purpose that just kind of almost felt internally like it's just you ever get like that restless feeling, like you're not like whether even if you're at a great job or something. I've had many jobs over the years like that where you in it for so long you just feel like this isn't it, this isn't my purpose. It's like you just feel an empty feeling. And I felt at time maybe it was faith, religion, and I filled those holes over the years, but it wasn't until I found this. It wasn't until I was really till I did my first podcast, so I, did my first videos online back in 2021. And once I like found an audience and I resonated on all these things that I've been studying over the years and saying, well, this is kind of weird, this is kind of odd. And like other people found it weird and odd as well. And look at where we've grown in just less than 5 years total, I'd say, of being online together, guys. Like several million people that follows my platforms across all the social media networks, over a million active followers every week come to my channel, and I just can't thank you guys enough. Bottom of my heart. That's why I want to craft this podcast moving forward to be as much of a part of your guys' enjoyment and benefit as well. My last mention here for the Freedom of Information letter. I got a couple more on standby. I wanted to kind of get your guys' ideas too, but the first one I got done, it's like pretty much signed, sealed, stamp licked on the letter, ready to go type thing. Got a couple more on standby. I want to see if you guys had any ideas of what I could subpoena the government for. But I got into it like historical viewing room here. I told you guys this a little bit at the beginning. The last point I want to make. Um, I don't want to, like I said, I have some conversation. It was like a nice half hour, hour long conversation after I finally got somebody who could help provide me with some physical copies of original building permits, and I can't wait to share them with you guys. Um, got some phone calls that I want to share too, but I don't want to give out any names or anything like that until everything happened in person. I don't want anybody harassing them until then, but I'm really excited to see what that. Hopefully, I'll have that all put together for you guys in some way, shape, or form next week. Um, oh boy, we're over an hour and a half here. Let's. Well, that's my Six and seven bullet points here. Kind of wrapped all of what we talked about yesterday and today up in a bowl. If you guys have any other questions, we can talk over the week on that up until our next show here coming up on Tuesday. Um, I did want to just take a moment, to tell you guys how thankful I was. But I read through all your chats from the last couple days, the last couple shows, and let's see if we got time to read a couple of the ones I just saved here, and I try and get a chance to answer your questions. Let's see, pulling this up and going forward, a good way for us to communicate with each other and learn and grow with each other. If you guys have a comment for this show, let me know in the any comment you want to be potentially heard on the show or answered on the show. Leave me, I'll address it as much as I possibly can. And um, live chats, leave comments as well. I'll try and get as many of them in an episode as I can. And we are going to take phone calls. I don't know if you guys, I was always a fan, big fan of classic radio. I mentioned that in my first episode a little bit. Um, I used to love the people that call in the radio stations and be able to talk to the radio hosts. I would, wait up to try and talk to the great George Norrie at Coast to Coast AM. Um, Rush Limbaugh is another. I mean, whatever you agree about his politics or not, he was a man of legend with voice behind the microphone. I mean, I don't think there's anybody that's quite done it in a radio sense, and I don't think there's anybody that would quite do it again. But going to work with my dad and stuff, and he was a big talk radio fan. That's where I obviously picked a lot of that up. But I used to always dream about, having a radio station kind of like that and having those people calling in. And that's why I said we will have an open call system going in too here. There is setups with the programs that I use. I just personally like, I never knew how much show prep time, notes taking, and stuff going into every episode would take. And it's been exhilarating as well, by the way. But I didn't know how much time that would take. So I haven't had a chance to kind of add some of those nuanced features like how to screen calls and stuff like that. But they are available, and it's an absolute something that I think is a key feature that I want to have on this show. Um, don't know how many calls you'll be able to get a day, doing 1 to 2 hours a day, 3 to 4 days a week, but we'll take at least one or two calls a day, try and, just get the pulse of what what's going on out there and what you guys are thinking. So let me see here. Got these questions pulled up. Call 40 ask, have you ever heard of a family making millions on the 1849 gold rush? Were miners orphan miners? Well, that's a good point. I've never really all the kid miners and stuff, and that definitely falls into that time frame of that massive swell of child labor. Call for zero. Thanks for the question, by the way. But 1.75 million kids in that time frame. It peaked out about 1910, that 1849 gold rush. Um, I never see like any little kid miners or like my gold sifters for these mines. No, I bet the gold mine access was a very regulated and controlled area of control as well. You either had to have a lot of money probably to buy some of these mining rights or building permits, right? They, for one, don't want you to dig around too much, but also I'd assume they'd want to have all that gold for themselves. So they probably incorporated most of the people to go out and get it on their behalf. So that's probably why you never have like seen any orphan miners, like little kid miners in those gold mines. And have I ever heard of any family making millions on the gold rush? No, I don't believe I have. And I think what your point to that question was who were all the people making money? And maybe that would be a nice topic is follow the money. That's one way to figure out the truth or who's behind somebody or who's pulling the strings behind somebody. We know like the George Soroses of this world, right? Like all the money and stuff he's into, like follow the money. It usually, leads to the answer to what's going on. Maybe we do that in the gold rush and see where all those gold miners that made millions, where they were connected to. But that was a great question. Hopefully, I kind of covered that for you. Let's see if got one or two more. I'm on a roll here. Um, Susan 4917. The parasites have occulted history and offer up pathetic explanations about everything. We know why they do that, but we are digging up the truth by questioning and analyzing what is evident. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed, Susan. Thank you very much for that comment. We are digging up and questioning and analyzing the cold, hard facts, and what is evident is very clear that the math doesn't math. That's what I said at the beginning of the last episode, right? Like, and that's what I hope I did a good job in these last two episodes doing is showing you, like, I want you guys to question everything, including what I say to you guys. I want you to always question the narrative, always question what's being told to you and by who it's being told from and what their motives are, and verify the sources. Don't just take my word for it. It's because I got a large platform. Like, I earned my platform by, my truths, spoke for themselves. Like, if everything I said was fraudulent or whatever, I mean, have I said made mistakes or posted incorrect or inaccuracies? Yes, of course. I've made a mistake many times before. I usually will always try and own up to it if I do something like that. But I am only human after all. I will make a mistake again, probably, and yeah, I do all my due diligence myself. But that's why I say check what I tell you yourselves. Don't just take it from me or anyone else at face value. That's where we got from. This is how we got to this problem. So many people just took all these lies in school, and that's why they so vehemently defend it, and they think we're stupid for saying, oh, like, there were ancient trees and giants, and maybe we didn't go to the moon. I mean, spoiler alert, we didn't go to the moon. But if we push even slightly back at this, they just, those walls are up because everything they were told for 20 years of schooling or whatever has been a joke, a liar. And it's hard for people to, it's easier to live in a lie than to admit you were deceived. Nobody likes to admit they're wrong, right? I mean, we all have an ego. I mean, nobody likes to be told they're wrong or what they know is false. I mean, and when everything you're false, I mean, that's like your whole sense of reality. So people can get defensive over it. That's why I said earlier, like, be patient with these people you guys are trying to wake up and work on. I've seen a lot of great comments over the years about that, like, how do I wake people up? Or I'm trying so hard with so and so to wake up my husband, I'm trying to get him to wake up and he won't see. To those people, I say, like, it's battles worth having, and you got to pick and choose, the battles, the big battles you have. It's not about winning the battle, it's about winning the war ultimately. And pinning on people's own egos and their own senses of waking up or not, like, sometimes they can be very defensive. And if you push hard against something like that, you're going to end up pushing them further away from your side. So be subtle, be gentle. That's literally how they won it over on us. They manipulated us. They subtly altered so much of our history, so much of, like, just the basic principles of this world that before a generation or two went back knew it. Like, it was all just a dupe, and we just kind of slowly slid into it, like little mini inches and we give a mile type of thing. I mean, I have that debate with my wife all the time. You give this kid an inch, she's going to take a mile and then some. And that's kind of what we did. We let them. They just kind of slowly chipped away at the truths until we have basically nothing left. That's why I'm so passionate about holding out and fighting for it, guys. And I know you are I know you are all too. And with that message being said, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your weekend, start of your weekend. Get out there, out of those rabbit holes, Enjoy maybe the chemtrail covered up suns, but enjoy the sun nonetheless. If you're an NFL fan, enjoy the playoffs or whatever you choose to indulge in, but indulge in some fun. Be there in the moment because we are never guaranteed or promised tomorrow. We're not even promised the next minute. Enjoy life while you can, especially if you have a family, a daughter, a daughter, a little son like I have. Sorry, I kind of just got a little choked even just thinking about them. You know, they're really why I do what I do on top of everything else. Like you have to be there and live in the moments with them because they grow up so fast. We grow up so fast. We um we will be the old people that hope to pass down a history that was different than the lies we were given. Enjoy your weekend, enjoy making memories, and we'll see you here again Tuesday, live and unfiltered, on questioning everything. And you guys continue to question everything. It is one of the greatest freedoms we have still. Until